And our top story, Sports and Recreation Minister Fikile Mbalula says Durban losing the Commonwealth Games hosting rights is a decision taken in the best interest of South Africa. Explaining the loss, Mbalula says the South African government had no appetite to issue an open-ended agreement in the current economic environment. He says the approved 4.56 billion rand should have been more than sufficient to host the world-class Commonwealth Games. Mbalula clarified that 118 million rand used for the bid before it fell through will not be recovered. He emphasized that losing the bid will not hurt the country. He says the Games would have benefited South Africa economically, but the nation has bigger socio-economic challenges to deal with.
It must be noted that when the Games were awarded to South Africa had not signed the host city agreement. Clauses in the agreement were seriously going to compromise South Africa, and the government was not prepared to sign an open-ended guarantee that indicated as follows, I quote, "The government will meet any potential shortfall in the budget for the organizing committee arising from the preparations for and the hosting of the 2022 Commonwealth Games. And the government also guarantees subsidies or rental costs related to the Commonwealth Games village," close quote. Due to the above requirement, the finance guarantee was delayed, but was signed in June 2016. Having learned lessons from other events, the South African government had no appetite to issue an open-ended guarantee, including having to transfer a large portion of funds to a newly established private entity.
And here's what 4 billion rand the nation saves from the Commonwealth bid can do for South Africa's poor. 40,000 RDP houses can be built at an average of 150,000 rand per unit. Over 200 schools can be built by government, and 4 specialist facilities such as the Mandela Children's Hospital can be added to the mix.
Well, we all know that if Durban could host the Commonwealth Games, it would indeed be a very big opportunity for South Africa. But looking at some of the arguments for and against, the first one says it allows upscaling of sporting infrastructure in the country and it creates revenue via tourism. Now, the argument against says that emerging economies have struggled to justify the high cost of sporting events. Well, taking a look at the next argument, it creates a short economic activity and employment during the period of the Games. While the argument again says that the South African economy is near a 0% growth and it isn't generating any extra cash for these sporting events. Taking a look at the last argument, the argument 4, it gives opportunity to South African sports to shine in front of the home crowd. And then against, they say that resource allocation needed to deal with far bigger challenges of inequality, poverty and unemployment.
The entire fiasco raises some key questions. Firstly, did government miscalculate its ability to fund a mega billion rand event like the Commonwealth Games when they bid for the tournament? And should government apologize for spending almost 120 million rand for the bidding process now that the money has gone down the drain? And should South Africa take a principled and unanimous decision to spend every penny for the next 10 years on dealing with the triple challenges of inequality, unemployment and poverty? No surprise that Durban lost the right to host the 2022 Commonwealth Games as signs of a withdrawal were visible that the bid would implode. The city missed some deadlines after the announcement, and the dream of Durban hosting the first African edition of the Games is now deferred. We ask if the bid lost of hosting the Commonwealth Games 2022 is a blessing or an embarrassment for the country. Joining us is Tony Modise, market commentator with Inholt Communications, and on the line we have Mielani Mkabela, a political economist. The lines are always open for you, to you on 011-542-2186. Tony, thanks so much for joining us and good evening to you. Let's just start with is this a blessing? Is this prudent for the minister and SASCOC to pull out as opposed to going on with something we can't afford?
Yeah, thank you, Cindy, for having me. I mean, South African economy has been in trouble for a very long time. We cannot really afford to have any write-offs, being it 118 million, or being in 10 million. We can't afford to have such write-offs. Remember, we need to show into, foreign investors that we have tight fiscal policies so that they can be comfortable to invest within our countries. Now, when there's been miscalculations and the bid has been made, money is gone, while we have, things that we can put in money into so we can boost South African economy. So, I mean, it's quite frustrating, I think.
Yeah. Mealani, good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. Was this really more about ego for South Africa, having drawn from the successes of the 2010 Soccer World Cup, that we can pull off another mega event like the Commonwealth Games, as opposed to looking at whether it's feasible or not on the get-go? Why bid if you know it's going to fall flat?
Come again, Cindy?
I was saying, with South Africa having gone through the bidding process in the first place, should the feasibility studies not have been concluded beforehand, rather than now sitting with this kind of mess?
I think, Cindy, you will understand that feasibility studies change continuously. So a feasibility study that might have been done 3 months back, it might not reflect the economic merits of today, and the decision that has been taken by our economic development, National Treasury, and Department of Sports in bidding for the games. I think it was relevant, and I wanted us to host the games. But if they then came up with a cost-benefit analysis and reviewed the feasibility study and find that the country will lose a lot of money, I think it's the best decision that the country has taken in attending to that, because these are games that, when you look on the past, two host countries that has hosted like the games, they struggle financially, or their Department of Sports or some of the economic forecast activities will have to struggle because of the expensive, these are capital intensive projects, and they need a lot of budget. And when you look at World Cup, I will agree. And then when you look on World Cup for rugby and World Cup for cricket and World Cup for soccer, you will agree. But these games, the challenge is, after we have finalized the games, no one will be participating in such, dynamic activities that were expected to come up with rules.
Yeah. All right, Mealani, just stay on the line. We have Tony in studio. Was it just poor planning, you think, Tony? Because obviously we already have projections as to where the trajectory of the economy was going to go. We know with the 0.3% slight recovery in the economy is an indication that in 5 years or so's time, we still wouldn't be able to afford the games. Do you think it was poor planning on the part of government?
There definitely could be poor planning, because this whole thing was done in 2015. And I mean, the most frustrating part is the loss. There's a loss and there's accountability. Yes, there's accountability, but when there's accountability, is there a recovery process of taxpayers' money? Is there ways that we can put in place so that the fund can be recovered and put it in other sectors? Remember, this is taxpayers' money, and then the South African economy, we are in the verge of being downgraded. These are such things that are creating bad reputation for South African economy.
Yeah, but the benefit of hosting it, of course, the glory of being the first African country to host the Commonwealth Games is something that we could add as a feather to the cap. But the reality is that we're also sitting with socio-economic challenges where the money could be channeled to. Question is it likely that the 4.5 billion rand that had been ring-fenced will now find its way in development challenges?
Definitely. I mean, as long as the 4.5 billion was put in place, it was going to be easier, because I mean, this is the first of its kind in Africa event that was going to take place. It was going to attract more investors. It was going to improve, I mean, sports and recreation facilities in South Africa as well. It was going to be completely positive, but then having to cut it off, and then without creating any provision for the whole thing, it becomes it becomes frustrating.
Mealani, you were drawing parallels with the 2010 Soccer World Cup, saying we're sitting with this euphoria and the fact that everybody around the world now knew Mandela people, so to speak. It was just a magical time when it happened. But of course, we had to sit with the recon of the debt, number one, in financing these infrastructure projects. The jobs themselves were not sustained once the projects were concluded. So what good would the Commonwealth Games have been in the long term, in your view, for South Africa and the continent?
I think continuously branding our economy is good, but at the same time, when we see that the branding is not there's no positive cost-benefit advantage for the country. I think we can just withdraw as we have withdrawn now. The games are very much important. It's the same as when you are hosting World Cup. It will be a lot of tourists coming to South Africa, and then tourists. After tourists came, you will start to see investors having interest because they are aware of the country. So these are the dynamics that tourism brings, and at the same time, the ranking of the country that will probably increase, basically because everyone will be looking at visiting South Africa, and brand South Africa will fly around the world. But I don't think it's good for us to continue growing at 0.3%. GDP with high unemployment. So that money can be taken, and then we do industrialization projects that will create jobs that are sustainable for our people. What we need to do as a country is to swallow this 60% youth unemployment, because it's not sustainable, Cindy, to run with young people that are energetic and they are not building the pension. And that is bad for the country, because you will find young people who will age 60 years with no pension that has been saved for them, and these people will have to be taken care from the welfare funding or SASSA funds. And this is one thing that we don't need. And proper planning for the country, we need to position all the budget in areas where it will boom the economy, so that we can be out of this zero cash growth and go to positive 3.5% up until 6%. That is where South Africa has to play around. I'm just shocked every time why we are not there. That's my way. All money must be positioned in good areas where we can see value for it.
Okay, but Tony, just the brand equity or value that Mialani was referring to from a bidding process going forward, should South Africa now take a back seat when it comes to bidding for international mega events until at least we've dealt with half of the socio-economic challenges facing us?
I mean, the idea would be around, there needs to be, proper planning in place, proper projections before we start bidding, because when you bid in these processes, there's huge amounts of money that are involved. So as long as proper projections have been put in place, and there's also funds that are available, that are confirmed, that are available to take over such projects, let's go in. We shouldn't stop with it. The next bid will be for rugby, South Africa to host rugby. Proper provision needs to be placed. This should be a learning curve, not a point of, completely cancelling South Africa from joining in.
All right, Tony, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks indeed. That's Tony Modise, market commentator, in-Holt Communications. Now we cut to OR Tambo International Airport. Acting Police Commissioner Khomotso Phahlane is briefing the media on the multi-million rand OR Tambo heist in Johannesburg.
Thanks, Ali. Good evening to you all. We thought it is important that we do a briefing to update you on where we are following the unfortunate incident, the robbery at the OR Tambo International Airport a week ago. The South African Police Service is pleased to report progress on the significant breakthrough in the highly organized OR Tambo International Airport heist, which took place on Tuesday, the 7th of March, 2017. We firstly want to use this opportunity to commend and express our appreciation to the multidisciplinary team of the South African Police Service and the Hawks, including the relevant stakeholders, who have been instrumental in ensuring a thorough investigation following the
So that's Acting Police Commissioner Lieutenant General Khomotso Phahlane briefing media. We do apologize for that break in transmission. We'll go back to that briefing. Of course, this is an issue that has grabbed the imagination of South Africans as to how this brazen cash heist could have taken place. It was reported that men, or rather armed men, entered the premises on the tarmac side or the aircraft side of the airport, clad or impersonating police officials. They were heavily armed and they rounded up the security personnel at OR Tambo International, made their way to the container that had foreign exchange valued at approximately 24 million rand. So far, we know that investigations are underway. We had spoken to Airports Company South Africa, who seem to have shifted the blame to the South African Police Service, saying that at all the entry points there were disruptions of the security procedures and that protocol wasn't properly followed. Of course, there's also the suspicion that this could only have been an inside job and that it trickles down to the value chain as to who is to blame for this particular cash heist of 24 million rand, and yet no answers or arrests have been made so far. So we'll go back to that press release, or rather press briefing with the Police Commissioner Khomotso Phahlane. And the Hawks are instrumental in the heist. They did mention that they will rope in all various law enforcement agencies to get to the bottom of it. There are a number of other transgressions that had happened at OR Tambo International over the years involving foreign exchange. There's also cartel that has been, or rather a scheme of foreign exchange in the black market that is being traded. Lots and lots of very bad publicity around this iconic national key point. We've spoken to specialists who said that all the procedures and protocols are in place, but it is the human element that is often a threat internally. If you cannot trust the personnel that works there, it's very difficult to ensure that security is upheld at all times. It would be interesting, of course, to see who is behind this particular brazen cash heist at OR Tambo International. Right now we're showing you graphics of the hangar and the parking area, where it's a very restricted area in terms of access. You would have to be vetted and have the necessary documentation and access cards as well to make it to this part of the airport. So this is not the passenger side as such. It's where you'd have your logistics companies, your bag handlers and various other services such as catering, air chefs, etc. And this particular cargo was due to be transported on the SAA carrier. And so far, as we mentioned, that authorities believe that it can only be an inside job. So the briefing is underway, and as soon as we have the link back, we'll go back to you. So what we had also discovered from Airports Company South Africa is that there are various loopholes, if you will, with all the stakeholders that are involved, not only from the customs point of view in managing or processing people in transit, but there's also the cargo issues. There's a whole host of material stakeholders in this particular operation, and at any point this kind of breach of the processes could have happened. So police at the moment saying that it is under investigation, also appealing to community members to come forward with information should you suspect anybody that possibly has had a change in lifestyle, that you could report to them as well. Very, very bad publicity for OR Tambo International Airport, especially if it's going to be another long, drawn-out or protracted process in getting those to book that are implicated in it. Okay, so if you've just missed it, we were talking to Tony Modise, markets commentator with Inholt Communications, regarding the South Africa losing the Commonwealth Games. Tony, I'll just ask you to put on your mic as we ventilate this further. In this, if we can weigh up, if really the 4.5 billion rand would have even been commensurate to what South Africa would be gaining in hosting the Commonwealth Games, considering that, number one, we may not have had the necessary infrastructure and sustained jobs around it. How do you value it? Do you think it was worthwhile in the first place?
It was definitely worthwhile in the first place. I mean, for us to beat with other people that are bidding and be able to win it. And I mean, it was going to be very, very worthwhile for our economy. Looking at our economy is basically, I mean, it's not growing according to expectation. This way going to be set some of the things that are going to help stimulate South African economy to be in better position. Most importantly, in creating jobs. And again, the most important thing is creating proper infrastructure for sports facilities for areas that are needing of this.
Yeah, but I mean the Commonwealth Games Federation now almost doubling what had been set aside to host the games. That in itself talks about the power imbalance. You know, although we're the host country, but we're dependent on the investment, and they could dictate and escalate costs to a point where we wouldn't be able to sustain it.
But then there are costs that could be recovered, and there are costs that will never be recovered, like the loss of 118 million. It can never be recovered. But the cost that we were going to incur, they were definitely going to be recovered, no matter how much they escalate them. But eventually, South African economy will be able to recover those in the long run.
I mean, I don't know if you've actually done sort of an assessment of the World Cup, because not soon after that, you know, news came out that we're hugely in debt, that the infrastructure would be white elephants, and I don't know if not much use. And we saw a gradual utilization of other sporting facilities that are not in the metropolis per se. So this could have been another hit and miss, considering we haven't hosted the Commonwealth Games before.
I mean, these should have been elements that we could have put attention to before we start bidding. Remember, before you start bidding, you need to make projections. You need to make your proper estimates. How much is your loss and how much are your gains? All of these things need to be put in perspective before we start executing and start taking the whole responsibility of hosting the Commonwealth Game. This could have been something that was going to be monumental for South African economy. That's going to be great for South African economy. But then now, if we cannot handle it, it's another case at large.
It's like a kid in class putting his hand up to give an answer, and he hits a blank.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you say it's more of an embarrassment, like it's a reputational crisis, or that needs to be communicated to the rest of the world, because of course now the federation is scrambling to find a replacement. We know that Liverpool has put its hand up, but essentially it does have a domino effect in the process itself.
I mean, in this situation, on an investment perspective, in a country that cannot handle its finances well, will you invest in that country? You will never invest in it. We need funds to be coming into South African economy. We need investors. Each and every cent is very important in this moment, because our economy is constantly shrinking, and I mean our unemployment rate is going high. So we need ways that will make sure that we attract investors. This was going to be like a company. When you run a company, you need such things that are monumental to attract people and to make sure that they are great. You do it better than another country. Of which in this situation, it was just, I mean, money that went down the drain.
Yeah, but do you think this could have a negative impact on South African athletes competing internationally?
I mean, I wouldn't really have a proper clarity on that, but it could have on a human thought processing, on a human way of doing things. I mean, you're looking at our great athletes, our great athletes, of which they get to have conversation with these other people, and I mean, what kind of conversation are they going to say when they go to their countries? Are they going to have that confidence? If they were here, they were a host, they were going to have that confidence in saying that we are hosting you guys and we are great. Then with other countries, South Africa couldn't even, they made a bet, but they can't even afford to host the Commonwealth Game.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, shouldn't we be happy that at least the minister was prudent enough to come out and own up and say, look, we don't have the money, we're not able to host the Commonwealth, so we're pulling out. Hard luck.
It's a good thing to own up, but then it's something else to say, hey, I slapped you, and after I slapped you and I tried to say sorry, how about I didn't do it at first? knowing that I don't have the ability to take it up.
You don't strike me like the guy that would hit a lady, but just to quantify these kind of things. You know, earlier on I mentioned whether we should host future events in light of what has happened now. If we can't afford it now, what are the chances that the next bidding process would be in a better financial state?
No, it's a matter of making, like I said earlier, it's a matter of making proper projections before we take up this whole duty. It's a matter of, finding proper clarity on our finance standing before we could really try to go out there and bid. It could look like this whole 118 million, it could look like a small amount to those people that are out there, but it's a lot of money to a taxpayer that has to still have to pay for these things in the near future.
Yeah. All right, Tony, thanks again. Tony Modise is a markets commentator. He is also founder of In-Halt Communications. We also had Mielani Mkabela, political economist, on the line. Thanks.